My father punched me in the face, then dragged me out of my brother's promotion party by my hair, while 46 guests watched and did nothing. My brother clapped and said I deserved it while my sister-in-law worried about her expensive rug. They thought they had finally broken me. They thought that by humiliating me in front of the church elders and their business partners, I would finally submit to their demands. But they did not know that as I lay bleeding on the concrete driveway, I was not crying for help. I was already dialing the one phone number that would end their entire charade. I made one call, and by the next morning, their bank accounts were frozen, their mansion was seized, and their lives were in ruins. I am Jasmine, 32 years old, and for my entire life I have been the scapegoat in a family obsessed with image. My father Otis is a pastor and the president of a non-profit organization that supposedly helps at-risk youth. To the public, he is a saint. To me, he is a monster who uses scripture to justify his greed. Before I tell you how I brought down their empire of lies, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Please hit like and subscribe if you believe that toxic family members do not deserve your loyalty just because they share your DNA. The night that changed everything started at my parents' newly renovated estate in an affluent suburb of Atlanta. The driveway was filled with luxury cars, most of them leased, just like the lifestyle my family projected. Inside, the air smelled of expensive cologne and hypocrisy. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, casting a warm glow on the faces of the community's elite. Doctors, lawyers, and deacons were all there to celebrate my brother Terrence. Terrence is the golden child. He is 35, charming, handsome, and completely incompetent. He has never held a real job for more than 6 months yet. Tonight was his inauguration as the new chief financial officer of the family foundation. I stood in the corner of the grand ballroom, clutching my purse, trying to make myself invisible. I knew the truth behind the celebration. The foundation was bleeding money. The renovation of this house had been paid for with funds meant for scholarships. I work as a forensic auditor for a major firm. I find hidden money and expose financial crimes for a living. My family hates my job because they know I can see right through them. I had only come to the party because my mother Betty begged me to keep up appearances. She said it would look bad if the whole family was not there. I should have known it was a trap. Halfway through the night, my father signaled for me to follow him into his study. The room was lined with mahogany bookshelves filled with books he never read. Terrence was already there, pouring himself a glass of aged scotch, looking smug in his tailored suit. My father closed the heavy oak door, locking out the sound of the jazz band and the laughter of the guests. Otis sat behind his massive desk and slid a document toward me. I did not even have to pick it up to know what it was. It was a loan guarantee for $2 million from a private lender. "Just sign it, Jasmine," my father said, his voice dropping the preaching tone he used in public. "We need a bridge loan to cover some overhead for the foundation. The bank is being difficult about my credit score, but yours is perfect." I picked up the paper and scanned the terms. The interest rate was predatory. But more importantly, the collateral listed was the foundation's community center, the one safe place for the kids in the neighborhood. "I am not signing this, Dad," I said, placing the paper back on the desk. "You are already over-leveraged. If you default on this, they will take the community center. I will not be a part of it." Terrence laughed, swirling his drink. "Come on, Jasmine. Don't be so dramatic. I am the CFO now. I have big plans. We will pay it back in no time. Your plans usually involve gambling or buying cars you cannot afford." "Terrence," I shot back. That was the wrong thing to say. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. My father stood up, his face darkening with a rage I knew too well. "You ungrateful little wretch," he hissed, coming around the desk. "We fed you, clothed you, and paid for that fancy education of yours. You owe us. You are nothing without this family. Sign the paper." I took a step back, my heart pounding against my ribs, but I stood my ground. "No. I will not help you commit fraud." The blow came out of nowhere. I didn't even see his hand move. His fist connected with my cheekbone with a sickening crack. The force of it knocked me off my heels. I stumbled backward, my legs tangling, and I crashed onto the hardwood floor. The room spun. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears. I tasted copper in my mouth. I touched my face and my fingers came away red. I looked up dazed, expecting to see regret on his face. Instead, I saw only contempt. Terence didn't even put down his drink. He looked at me with a sneer and said, "You had that coming, Jasmine, always acting like you are better than us." The commotion must have been loud because the study door opened. Courtney Terrence's wife stood in the doorway. She was wearing a silk gown that cost more than my car. She looked at me sprawled on the floor bleeding, and then she looked at the rug beneath me. "Oh my God, Otis!" she shrieked, but not out of concern for my safety. "Get her off the floor. She is dripping blood on my new Persian runner. Do you know how much that cost? It is authentic silk." My father reached down, but not to help me up. His thick fingers tangled into my natural hair, gripping the roots tight. A scream tore from my throat as he yanked me upward, not to my feet, but dragging me across the floor like a sack of garbage. I clawed at his hand, trying to relieve the pressure on my scalp, but he was too strong. He dragged me out of the study and into the main hallway. The music stopped. The conversation died. 46 pairs of eyes turned to watch. These were people I had known since childhood, people who claimed to be pillars of the community. My mother was standing near the buffet table. She saw her husband dragging her daughter by the hair, blood running down my chin. "Mom," I gasped, reaching a hand out toward her. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't move. She didn't scream. She simply covered her mouth with a napkin and looked away, whispering, "Oh, Jasmine, why do you have to be so difficult? Why do you always provoke him?" The betrayal stung worse than the punch. My father dragged me past the stunned guests. I tried to dig my heels in, but my shoes slipped on the polished marble. My dress tore at the shoulder, exposing my skin. "Open the door!" "Terence," my father bellowed. My brother jogged ahead, opening the grand double front doors with a grin on his face. "This is what happens when you disrespect the family." "Jasmine, let this be a lesson." My father swung me forward, releasing my hair. I flew out onto the front porch, stumbling down the stone steps before collapsing onto the concrete driveway. My knees scraped against the rough surface, tearing skin. "Get out of here," my father shouted, his chest heaving. "And don't come back until you are ready to apologize and sign that paper." He slammed the heavy doors shut. I heard the lock click. Then, through the thick wood, I heard Terrence's voice. "Sorry about that, everyone. Just a little family misunderstanding. Let's get back to the party." And then the most chilling sound of all. Applause. They were clapping. They were going back to their champagne and their canapes as if I didn't exist. I sat there in the dark for a long time, the cold night air stinging my open wounds. My face throbbed with a pulse of its own. I felt small, broken, and utterly alone. For years I had protected them. I had fixed their tax returns, covered up their bad investments, and kept their secrets because I thought that was what family did. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was useful enough, they would finally love me. But as I wiped the blood from my lip and looked at the closed doors of the mansion, I realized the truth. They didn't love me. They loved my utility. And now that I had refused to be used, I was trash to them. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a break, it was a shift. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I was done being the victim. I was done being the scapegoat. I reached into my torn purse and pulled out my phone. The screen was cracked from the fall, a spider web of glass over the display, but it still lit up. My thumb hovered over the emergency dialer, but I didn't call 911. The local police chief was inside that house drinking my father's scotch. Calling them would be useless. Instead, I scrolled down to a number I had never saved with a name only a series of digits I had memorized for a worst-case scenario. It was the direct private line of Special Agent Miller, the head of the federal task force investigating financial crimes in the nonprofit sector. I took a deep breath, ignoring the pain in my jaw, and pressed call. It rang twice. Miller, a gruff voice answered. Agent Miller, it is Jasmine. I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. Jasmine, is everything all right? You are calling late. I looked up at the glowing windows of the mansion, seeing the silhouettes of my family dancing inside. I am ready, I said. Activate the file. Operation Clean House. There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure, Jasmine? Once we start this, there is no going back. We will take everything. I touched my swollen cheek. Take it all, Miller. Take every single dime. I hung up the phone and limped toward my car. They had their party tonight, but tomorrow the hangover would be lethal. The drive to the county hospital was a blur of neon lights and throbbing pain. I gripped the steering wheel of my sedan with white knuckles, trying to keep the car steady as my left eye began to swell shut. Every bump in the road sent a fresh wave of agony through my skull, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold, hollow ache in my chest. I was 32 years old, a senior forensic auditor who brought down corporate fraudsters for a living, and yet I was driving myself to the emergency room because my father had treated me like a rebellious child. I parked in the shadows of the emergency lot, avoiding the bright floodlights. I did not want anyone to recognize Jasmine, the pastor's daughter, in this state. Checking my reflection in the rearview mirror was a mistake. The woman staring back at me looked like a stranger. My lip was split, dried blood caked on my chin, and a dark purple bruise was blossoming across my cheekbone. I looked like a victim. I hated that word. I had spent my entire career fighting for victims, ensuring they got justice. I never thought I would be one. Walking into the sterile, white waiting room, I kept my head down. The triage nurse, a kind-faced woman named Brenda, who I had seen at church once or twice, gasped when I approached the desk. "Honey," she whispered, leaning over the counter. "Who did this to you? We need to call the police." I shook my head immediately, wincing as the movement pulled at my bruised neck. "No police, Brenda. Please, just put it down as a fall." I slipped on the stairs. She looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. She knew who my father was. Everyone in this district knew Pastor Otis. She also knew that the local police chief Henderson played golf with my father every Sunday after service. If I called the police now, Henderson would be at the hospital in 10 minutes, not to take a statement, but to smooth things over and make sure the pastor's reputation remained spotless. I would be painted as the hysterical daughter having a mental breakdown. I had seen them do it to others. I would not let them do it to me. As I lay on the stiff hospital bed behind a thin curtain, listening to the beeping of monitors and the distant wail of an ambulance, my mind drifted back. The doctor was stitching my lip, the needle pulling at my skin, but the sharp sting only triggered memories I had tried to suppress. This was not the first time they had hurt me, though it was the first time they had used fists. The violence had always been financial and emotional, a slow bleed that I had foolishly mistaken for family duty. I remembered the day I graduated with my master's degree in accounting. I stood on the stage searching the crowd for my parents. They were not there. They had gone to a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a barber shop Terrence had opened, a barber shop that went bankrupt 3 months later because Terrence spent the operating capital on a luxury vacation to Miami. I remembered the text my mother sent me that day. "Terrence needs our support right now, Jasmine. You are smart. You know you will be fine. We are proud of you, though." Proud. That word was a lie. They were only proud when I was useful. I remembered 3 years ago when my father said the church needed a new roof. He asked me for $50,000. I gave it to him, draining my savings because I wanted to be the good daughter. 2 weeks later, Courtney posted a picture of her new diamond tennis bracelet. The roof still leaked. When I asked about it, my father told me I lacked faith and that God provided in mysterious ways. I was the one who crunched the numbers. I knew God had nothing to do with their fraud. They called me a bean counter. They mocked my job, saying I was boring, that I lacked the charisma of the family. They did not realize that while they were busy being charismatic, I was busy learning how to trace every single penny they tried to hide. A vibration on the metal tray beside the bed snapped me back to the present. My phone. The screen was shattered, but the message was readable. It was from Terrence. I stared at the text, reading it 3 times to make sure the concussion was not making me hallucinate. It read, "You really upset Dad tonight. His hand is swollen from hitting you. You need to send $5,000 for his medical bill and for the distress you caused the family. Do not make us come find you." I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The audacity was breathtaking. My brother, the man who had clapped while I was dragged across the floor, was demanding I pay for the pain in my father's hand. The hand that had disfigured my face. That text message was the final severing of the cord. The last thread of guilt, the last whisper of obligation, the last hope that they might one day love me, it all incinerated in that moment. I did not reply. I did not cry. My tears had dried up somewhere between the front porch and the hospital parking lot. I sat up, ignoring the dizziness. I grabbed my purse and pulled out the small encrypted flash drive I always kept on my keychain. It contained 3 years of forensic data. Bank statements, shell company registrations, tax evasion records, and the emails Terrence thought he had deleted. I had named the file Operation Clean House. I had hesitated to use it because despite everything they were my blood. But blood was just biology. Betrayal was a choice. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number. Agent Miller. It was almost midnight. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough with sleep but instantly alert. "This is Miller. Agent Miller, it is Jasmine." There was a pause. The shift in his tone was palpable. He had been waiting for this call for 6 months. "Jasmine, are you safe?" I touched the bandage on my cheek. "No," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I am not safe. And neither are they." "Do you want to proceed?" Miller asked. He sounded serious, almost warning me. "You know what happens once we pull this trigger. The assets get frozen immediately. The warrants go out in the morning. Your father, your brother, the whole organization. There is no turning back." I looked at the text from Terrence one last time. $5,000 for his hand. "Execute it," I said. "File 409. I want full aggressive enforcement. No deals, no immunity. Burn it all down." "Copy that," Miller said. "I will mobilize the team. We will be at the church on Sunday." I hung up the phone. The silence in the room was heavy, but it was not oppressive anymore. It felt like the silence before a storm. The doctor came back in to check my vitals. "You are good to go, Jasmine," he said gently, "but you need to rest. Do you have someone to call? Someone to drive you home?" I looked him in the eye. My left eye was completely swollen shut now, but my right eye was clear and sharp. "No," I said, sliding off the bed and standing on my own 2 feet. "I do not have anyone. But I do not need anyone." I walked out of the emergency room into the cool night air. My face was throbbing, my body was aching, and my heart was broken. But as I walked to my car, I felt a strange sensation rising in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was power. They thought they had broken the bean counter. They had no idea they had just unleashed the auditor. And the audit was due on Sunday. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my apartment, hitting my face like a physical blow. I groaned as I tried to sit up, my entire body stiff and aching from the previous night. I walked to the bathroom mirror and inspected the damage. The swelling had gone down slightly thanks to the ice packs, but the bruising had bloomed into a violent shade of purple and black that covered the entire left side of my face. My lip was still swollen, the stitches pulling tight every time I tried to open my mouth. I looked like I had gone 12 rounds in a boxing ring, not attended a family party. I limped to the kitchen to make coffee, needing the caffeine to clear the fog in my brain. My phone, which I had left on the counter, lit up with a notification. It was Instagram. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the screen and opened the app. The first thing that popped up was a post from Courtney. It was a photo taken last night, presumably after they had thrown me out. The caption read, "Glorious night celebrating my husband's promotion. God is so good to this family. We are blessed beyond measure. Hashtag family first. Hashtag black excellence. In the photo, Terrence was holding a glass of champagne, grinning like he hadn't just watched his father assault his sister. My mother was smiling, that tight practice smile she used for church photos. My father looked regal and composed. They had even photoshopped the background to remove any trace of the scuffle. It was a perfect, curated lie. I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. They were not just moving on, they were erasing me. They were betting on my silence, banking on the fact that I had always been the obedient daughter who would never shame the family in public. A sharp, authoritative knock at my front door interrupted my scrolling. I froze. My first thought was that Terrence had come to finish what he started. I moved quietly to the door and checked the peephole. It wasn't Terrence. It was a tall, broad-shouldered black man in an expensive navy suit. I recognized him immediately. It was Harrison, the family's longtime attorney. He was the one who made my father's traffic tickets disappear and drafted the contracts that kept the foundation's money moving in circles. He was a fixer. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just enough to show my face. Harrison's eyes flickered to my bruise for a fraction of a second, but his expression remained professionally neutral. He didn't gasp. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just gave a tight, polite nod. "Good morning, Jasmine," he said, his voice smooth and deep. "May I come in? We need to discuss the unfortunate events of last evening." I stepped back and opened the door wider, allowing him to enter. He walked in with the confidence of a man who owned every room he stepped into, placing his leather briefcase on my dining table. He looked around my apartment with a subtle sneer, judging the modest furniture and the lack of luxury. "My father sent you, didn't he?" I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter, because my legs were still trembling. Harrison clicked the latches on his briefcase open. "Your father is very concerned about you, Jasmine. He feels that emotions ran high last night and that mistakes were made on both sides. He wants to ensure that this family remains united." "Mistakes on both sides," I repeated, my voice rising. "He punched me in the face, Harrison. He dragged me by my hair across a hardwood floor." Harrison held up a hand, stopping me. "We are not here to litigate the past, Jasmine. We are here to secure the future. Your father is willing to overlook your disrespect and the disruption you caused at the party. He is even willing to cover your medical expenses and provide a small stipend to help you get back on your feet, provided we can come to an understanding." He pulled a thick document out of his briefcase and slid it across the table toward me. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the crisp white paper. "It is a standard non-disclosure agreement," Harrison explained, uncapping a gold fountain pen. "It states that you will not discuss, publish, or share any details regarding the internal affairs of the Sterling family or the Hope for Youth Foundation. It also includes a clause that prevents you from pursuing any legal action regarding the alleged incident last night. In exchange, the family will not pursue legal action against you for defamation or the potential financial damages caused by your scene at the party." I looked at him, stunned by the audacity. They were not just trying to buy my silence, they were threatening to sue me for getting beaten up. "And if I don't sign?" I asked quietly. Harrison sighed, a sound of mock sympathy. "Then your father will be forced to cut you off completely. You will be removed from the family trust, though we both know there isn't much in there for you anyway. More importantly, the family will have to release a statement clarifying that you have been struggling with mental health issues and instability. It would be very damaging for your career as an auditor if word got out that you were emotionally compromised." It was a threat, a clear, cold threat to destroy my professional reputation if I spoke up. I walked over to the table and picked up the document. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking from adrenaline. I read the legal jargon carefully. It was comprehensive. It specifically forbade me from speaking to law enforcement or regulatory agencies about the foundation's finances. My auditor's brain kicked into high gear. Harrison, in his arrogance, had just made a fatal error. By asking a witness to a crime to sign a contract buying their silence, and by including clauses about concealing financial data, he was committing a federal crime. This document was not a shield for them, it was a smoking gun. It was tangible proof of obstruction of justice and witness tampering. I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to play the part. I had to be the scared, defeated daughter they expected me to be. I sat down at the table, letting my shoulders slump. I stared at the paper, letting a single tear escape from my right eye. "I just want this to be over," I whispered, making my voice sound small and broken. "I don't want to lose my family. I don't want people to think I'm crazy." Harrison softened, thinking he had won. "It is for the best, Jasmine. Just sign and we can put this ugly chapter behind us. Your father loves you. He just needs loyalty." I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the signature line. If I signed this, it would be void anyway because it was a contract to cover up a crime. But the act of them coercing me to sign it was the evidence Agent Miller needed to elevate this case from simple fraud to a racketeering conspiracy. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. Jasmine Sterling. Harrison smiled, a shark baring its teeth. He pulled the document away, checked the signature, and placed his copy in his briefcase. He left a duplicate copy on the table for me. "You made the right choice, Jasmine," he said, snapping the briefcase shut. "I will let your father know you are being cooperative. Get some rest. You look terrible." He walked out of my apartment without looking back. I listened to his heavy footsteps retreating down the hallway. I waited until I heard the elevator ding and the doors slide shut. The moment he was gone, my posture straightened. The tears stopped instantly. I walked to the door and locked it, throwing the deadbolt with a loud clack. I went back to the table and picked up my copy of the NDA. I scanned it immediately with my phone, the high-resolution camera capturing every clause, every threat, and my shaky signature at the bottom. I opened the encrypted messaging app I used to communicate with Agent Miller. I attached the file and typed a short message. "They just tried to buy my silence." Attorney Harrison presented me with this NDA, threatening my career if I reported the assault or the financial discrepancies. Obstruction of justice, witness tampering, add it to the pile. I hit send. A moment later, 3 dots appeared, then a reply from Miller. "We have them. This connects the lawyer to the conspiracy. It proves intent to conceal. Good work, Jasmine. Stay inside. We are moving the timeline up." I put my phone down and looked at the NDA one last time before shredding the physical copy. I walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, my family was probably toasting to their victory, thinking they had neutralized the threat. They thought they had buried me. They didn't realize they were actually seeds, and I was about to grow a jungle of consequences that would suffocate them all. The calm before the storm was over. Now the rain was about to fall. And it was going to wash away everything they had built. The glow of 3 27-inch monitors was the only light in my office. While the rest of the world was waking up to a sunny Tuesday morning, I was deep in the digital catacombs of the Hope for Youth Foundation. My face still throbbed, a constant rhythmic reminder of why I was sitting here instead of curling up in bed, but the physical pain was becoming background noise. It was being drowned out by the sheer, unadulterated focus of the hunt. I was not just Jasmine the daughter anymore. I was Jasmine the forensic auditor, and I was dissecting my family's life with the cold precision of a surgeon. Agent Miller had given me the green light to assist in the preliminary tracing while his team secured the warrants. He needed me to identify the most active accounts to freeze first. It did not take long. My father and brother were arrogant, and arrogance makes people sloppy. They thought because they were the signatories, no one would ever look at the raw data. I pulled up the ledger for the fiscal year. On the surface, it looked legitimate. There were categories for community outreach scholarship funds and building maintenance. But when I drilled down into the vendor payments, the ROT was everywhere. I found a recurring monthly payment of $4,000 to a company called Elite Transport Services. A quick cross-reference with the State Business Registry showed that Elite Transport Services was registered to a P.O. box in a strip mall, and its sole officer was Terrence. There were no transport services. He was paying himself a salary on top of his salary to lease his own luxury car back to the nonprofit. Then I found the credit card statements. This was where the greed was most visceral. I saw a charge for $12,000 at a boutique in Buckhead. In the accounting software, it was labeled as textbook supplies for the after-school program. I clicked on the scanned receipt image. It wasn't textbooks, it was a vintage Hermes Birkin bag. The date on the receipt matched my sister-in-law Courtney's birthday. I saw charges for the Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas totaling $15,000 over a weekend, labeled as Youth Leadership Conference. A quick Google search confirmed there were no leadership conferences in Vegas that weekend, but there was a heavyweight boxing match. They were not just skimming off the top. They were shoveling money out of the foundation as fast as donors could shovel it in. They were stealing from the very children they claimed to protect using the faces of poor black kids on brochures to fund their high-fashion lifestyle. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. I opened the terminal that connected directly to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Because the investigation was now officially flagged as potential money laundering and tax fraud, we had the authority to initiate an immediate administrative freeze on personal assets linked to the suspect entities. I typed in Terrence's social security number, then Courtney's, then my father's. The system prompted me for confirmation. Initiate Level 1 Asset Freeze. Reason suspected misappropriation of charitable funds. My finger hovered over the Enter key. I thought about the text message demanding $5,000 for my father's bruised hand. I thought about Courtney worrying about her rug while I bled. I pressed Enter. The screen flashed green. Command accepted. Notification sent to banking institutions. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of cold coffee. It was done. The digital guillotine had dropped. Now I just had to wait for the head to roll. Across town at exactly 12:30 in the afternoon, Terrence and Courtney were walking into Le Jardin, one of the most pretentious French restaurants in the city. I knew they were there because Courtney had checked in on Facebook, captioning the post as a power lunch with the Andersons. The Andersons were a wealthy white couple who sat on the board of several major charities. Terrence and Courtney were desperate to impress them, desperate to be welcomed into their inner circle of old money. I could picture the scene perfectly. They would be seated at a prime table near the window. Courtney would be wearing the Hermes bag she had bought with stolen money, flashing it every chance she got. Terrence would be ordering the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu, not because he liked the taste, but because he liked the price tag. They would spend 2 hours talking about their philanthropic vision, about how heavy the burden of leadership was, about how blessed they were to be vessels of God's work. The Andersons would nod politely, charmed by the charismatic young black couple who seemed to bridge the gap between the streets and the boardroom. The bill would arrive on a small silver tray. The total would likely be over $400. Terrence, eager to assert his dominance, would snatch the check before Mr. Anderson could reach for it. "No, no, Bob, I insist," he would say. "It is on the foundation today. We are celebrating." He would pull out his sleek, heavy black Amex card, the card that made a satisfying clatter when it hit the tray. The waiter would take it with a bow and walk away. This was the moment. I watched the clock on my computer screen tick. In the restaurant, the waiter would be sliding the card into the chip reader. He would wait a second. Then the machine would beep. A harsh electronic rejection. Do not honor. The waiter would frown, wipe the chip on his apron, and try again. Do not honor. Contact bank. I closed my eyes and let myself imagine the waiter walking back to the table. The walk of shame. I pictured the waiter leaning down, whispering discreetly, so as not to embarrass the guests. "I am sorry, sir." The card was declined. Terrence would laugh, a loud, boisterous sound meant to cover his insecurity. "That is impossible. There is no limit on that card. Run it again." "I already did, sir, twice. It says, do not honor. Do you have another form of payment?" The table would go quiet. Courtney's smile would falter. The Andersons would exchange a quick, awkward glance, pretending to look at the artwork on the walls. Terrence would feel the heat rising in his neck. Here, try this one. He would pull out his Visa. Declined. Try the debit card. Declined. By now, the silence at the table would be deafening. The Andersons would be shifting in their seats, realizing that this power couple was powerless. Courtney, do you have your card? Terrence would ask, his voice tight with panic. Courtney would dig through her stolen handbag, producing her gold card. The waiter would take it. Declined. In my office, I refreshed the banking log. I saw the attempts appearing in real time. Transaction denied. Transaction denied. Transaction denied. Back at the restaurant, the humiliation would be complete. Terrence would be sweating now, his tailored suit feeling suddenly too tight. He would stand up, knocking his chair back. Excuse me, I need to make a call. The bank must be having a system error. This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? He would storm out to the lobby, leaving Courtney alone to face the pitying stares of the Andersons. He would dial the concierge number for the bank, ready to scream at some low-level customer service representative. I imagined him pacing the lobby, shouting into his phone, "Why is my card not working? I have a credit limit of $50,000. And then the voice on the other end of the line would deliver the news that would turn his anger into ice-cold fear. Mr. Sterling, I am looking at your account now. I cannot unblock these cards. Your accounts have been frozen by a federal mandate. You have been flagged by the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. You need to contact a federal attorney. The phone would probably slip from his hand. Federal. That was the word that broke men like Terrence. They could handle debt collectors. They could handle civil lawsuits. But federal meant prison. Federal meant the end. He would look back into the dining room where his wife was currently trying to explain to their wealthy friends why they could not pay for a salad. He would realize that the facade he had spent his whole life building was made of glass, and someone had just thrown a brick through it. I opened a new window on my computer and typed an email to Agent Miller. Subject: Initial freeze active. Body: the subjects have just attempted to access funds and were denied. Panic will set in within the hour. They will start making mistakes. They will start calling each other. Be ready to record. I hit send. I sat there for a moment in the quiet of my office. I should have felt guilty. That was my brother. That was his wife. But then I touched my cheek again. I remembered the applause. I remembered the way they looked at me like I was garbage. And I felt nothing but a deep, satisfying sense of balance. The scales were finally tipping. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. Jasmine, are you okay? We haven't heard from you. Terrence is having some trouble with the bank accounts. He thinks it's a glitch, but he is very upset. Do you know anything about this? You work in finance. I looked at the message. The manipulation never stopped. Even now, she was trying to use me to fix their mess. I deleted the thread without replying. The financial war had begun, and I had just won the first battle without even leaving my chair. The headquarters of Hope for Youth was designed to look humble from the outside to encourage donations, but the executive suite was pure opulence. From the digital safety of my command center 3 miles away, I watched the surveillance feed of my brother Terrence storming into the building. He was 30 minutes late as usual. His designer suit was rumpled, and beads of sweat were already glistening on his forehead. He did not look like a CEO. He looked like a man running from a ghost. I adjusted my headset, turning up the volume on the microphone I had covertly installed in his office months ago. At the time, I told him it was part of a new security system to protect against break-ins. In reality, it was my insurance policy. I had known this day would come. Through the grainy black and white video, I saw Mrs. Higgins, the office manager, intercept him in the hallway. Mrs. Higgins was a 60-year-old widow who kept the place running while Terrence played golf. She looked worried, clutching a stack of payroll checks against her chest. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice trembling slightly through my speakers. "The bank just called. They said the payroll transfer was rejected. The staff are waiting for their checks. Some of them have rent due today." Terrence waved her off, not even stopping to look her in the eye. It is just a glitch, Mrs. Higgins. I am handling it right now. Tell them to wait. He slammed his office door shut and locked it. I watched him lean against the heavy wood for a moment, breathing hard. The humiliation at the restaurant had shaken him, but he still thought he could fix this. He still thought he was smarter than the system. He rushed to his desk and woke up his computer. I saw his fingers flying across the keyboard, logging into the Foundation's primary operating account. On my screen, I saw the login attempt. I took a sip of water and waited. He stared at his monitor. I could practically see the color draining from his face as the red banner flashed across his screen. Account frozen. Contact Federal Administrator. He tried again. And again. He slammed his fist onto the mahogany desk, rattling the expensive crystal decanter set that had been purchased with money meant for after-school tutoring programs. No, 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 he muttered, his voice rising in panic. This cannot be happening. He grabbed his desk phone, then slammed it down, realizing the landlines might be compromised. He pulled out his personal cell phone, the one with the cracked screen from when he threw it earlier, and dialed a number. I did not need to guess who he was calling. Dad. Pick up, he hissed into the phone, pacing the length of his office. Finally, Otis answered. I could hear my father's booming voice clearly through the office speakers. Terrence? Why are you calling me? I am preparing for the deacons' meeting. Dad, it is all gone. Terrence whispered, his voice cracking. The credit cards, the operating account, even the reserve fund. Everything is locked. Mrs. Higgins is outside asking for payroll. What do I do? There was a silence on the other end. Then my father's voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. Stop panicking, boy. You sound weak. If they froze the domestic accounts, it means the IRS is phishing. They do not have everything. But I cannot pay the staff, Dad, Terrence shouted. If I don't pay them, they will talk. If they talk, the press will be here by tomorrow. Listen to me, Otis snapped. We have the contingency. I told you never to touch it unless it was an emergency, but this qualifies. You mean the island account? Terrence asked, looking around the empty room as if the walls had ears. Yes, the Cayman account, Otis confirmed. There is $200,000 in there. Transfer enough to cover payroll and get some cash for yourself. Do it now and do not use the office Wi-Fi. Use your cellular data. I smiled. They were so predictable. The Cayman Islands account was their pride and joy. They thought it was untouchable, hidden behind layers of shell companies and offshore privacy laws. They thought no one knew about it. But they forgot who set up their IT infrastructure. They forgot that the daughter they called a bean counter was the one who scrutinized every wire transfer for the last 5 years. I had tracked the initial funding for that account 3 years ago. It came from a kickback scheme involving a construction company that was supposed to build a new gymnasium for the youth center. The gym was never built, but the money disappeared into the Caribbean. I opened a secure chat window with Agent Miller. Subject: Cayman access attempt imminent. Message: they are activating the contingency fund. Account number ending in 5590. Bank of Grand Cayman. The authorization code will be Proverbs. I hit send. Miller replied instantly. We are ready. Let him try. I watched Terrence sit back down at his desk. He disconnected his phone from the Wi-Fi and opened a browser on his mobile data just like Daddy instructed. He looked relieved, almost smug. He thought he had found the loophole. He thought he was about to outsmart the feds. He typed in the web address. He entered the username. He typed in the password. I leaned closer to my monitor. This was the moment of truth. Terrence tapped the screen to submit. I counted down in my head. 3, 2, 1. Terrence's face went blank. He tapped the screen again. Then he started shaking his phone as if the device was the problem. What he screamed. He put the phone to his ear and called Otis back immediately. Dad, it is not working. What do you mean it is not working? Otis barked. It says access denied, account suspended, pending international investigation. Dad, it says Interpol. The silence that followed was heavy and terrified. Interpol. That was a level of trouble they had not even conceived of. That meant international crime. That meant extradition. That meant the end of the world as they knew it. It cannot be. Otis whispered, his voice trembling for the first time. No one knows about that account. Only you and I have the codes. Someone is talking. Terrence said, his eyes darting around the room wildly. We have a rat. It has to be someone in the office. Is it Mrs. Higgins? She has been asking questions about the budget lately. Mrs. Higgins, Otis scoffed. That old woman does not know how to turn on a PDF file. Think Terrence. Who else has had access to the files? Terrence paused. I could see the gears turning in his head. He looked at the security camera in the corner of the room, staring directly at me without knowing I was there. Jasmine, he whispered. Otis laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. Your sister? Please. Jasmine does not have the stomach for this. She is probably crying in her apartment right now, terrified we are going to sue her. She signed the NDA this morning, Terrence. Harrison told me she was shaking like a leaf. She is weak. She is not capable of this. You are right, Terrence said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. She is too soft. It must be the accountant we fired last year. Or maybe the bank made a mistake. They were so arrogant. Even as their walls were crumbling down around them, they could not conceive that the daughter they abused was the architect of their destruction. They were so blinded by their own misogyny and narcissism that they couldn't see the predator sitting right in front of them. Listen to me, Otis ordered. Leave the office. Do not talk to Mrs. Higgins. Do not talk to anyone. Go out the back door. Come to my house. We need to shred the physical files. If they have the accounts, they will come for the paper trail next. I am leaving now, Terrence said. He grabbed his briefcase and began shoving papers from his desk into it haphazardly. He stood up, looking at his expensive office one last time. He grabbed a framed photo of himself shaking hands with the mayor and threw it into the trash can. Then, in a fit of impotent rage, he took his cell phone and smashed it against the corner of the desk. The screen shattered, sending shards of glass flying onto the carpet. Damn it, he screamed, kicking the heavy oak desk. He stormed out of the office, leaving the door wide open. I switched camera feeds following him as he ran down the back hallway, avoiding the reception area where the employees were still waiting. He pushed through the emergency exit, setting off a silent alarm that only I could see, and sprinted toward his car. I sat back in my chair, a cold smile playing on my lips. Go ahead, run to Dad, I whispered to the empty room. Run home to the mansion. That is exactly where we want you. I picked up my phone and sent another message to Miller. Target is on the move. He is heading to the primary residence to destroy evidence. He has physical files in his possession. Otis has instructed him to shred documents. You have probable cause for immediate entry. Miller replied with a single emoji. A thumbs up. I closed the laptop. My work here was done for now. The rat was not Mrs. Higgins. The rat was not the fired accountant. The rat was the woman they beat and discarded. I stood up and walked to the kitchen to make a sandwich. I was suddenly starving. Destruction. It turned out worked up quite an appetite. They thought I was weak. They thought I was soft. But they were about to learn a very hard lesson. Soft things, when compressed under enough pressure, turn into diamonds. And diamonds are the hardest substance on earth. They were about to cut themselves on my edges. I had just finished my sandwich when the notification popped up on my phone. Motion detected at front door. I did not need to guess who it was. The timeline was proceeding exactly as Agent Miller had predicted. First came the denial, then the panic, and now the misplaced rage. I walked over to the wall-mounted monitor that displayed the feed from my doorbell camera. Courtney was standing in my hallway. She looked like a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but a very expensive one. Her blonde hair was slightly disheveled, and she was banging on my door with the heel of her hand. She was still wearing the outfit from the lunch she had just been humiliated at, though her designer jacket was now hanging loosely off one shoulder. Open this door, Jasmine, she screamed, pounding the wood with a rhythmic, frantic intensity. I know you are in there. You think you are so smart with your little computer tricks? Undo whatever you did to my cards right now. I stood in the silence of my living room, sipping my water, watching her unravel. It was fascinating to watch the mask slip. For years, Courtney had played the role of the sweet, charitable sister-in-law. She was the one who always asked if I was okay in a tone that suggested I was mentally unstable. She was the one who would touch my hair without asking and make comments about how exotic I looked. Now the veneer of politeness was gone, revealing the ugly entitlement underneath. She kicked the door, leaving a scuff mark from her designer heel. "I knew you would do something like this," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the quiet hallway of my apartment building. "You have always been jealous of me. You are jealous that I married your brother. You are jealous that I have the life you could never have. It is so pathetic, Jasmine. Just because you are miserable and alone does not mean you get to drag us down into the gutter with you." I leaned closer to the screen. There it was. The microaggression she had been suppressing for years. The assumption that my life, my black excellence, my independence was somehow lesser than her status as a wife living off stolen money. She viewed my apartment, my career, and my solitude as the gutter simply because it did not look like her manicured, fraudulent reality. I pressed the talk button on the intercom system. My voice came out clear and calm through the small speaker outside, cutting through her hysteria. "Go home, Courtney," I said. "You are embarrassing yourself." She jumped back, startled by the voice, but then she leaned into the camera, her face distorted by the fish-eye lens. Her eyes were wild, manic. Embarrassing myself, she laughed, a high-pitched, incredulous sound. "You are the one who should be embarrassed, hiding in here like a coward. You think you can ruin my lunch? You think you can freeze my money? That is my money, Jasmine. My husband earned that money. You are just a bitter little girl who cannot stand seeing us shine." She was so loud that I saw the door across the hall crack open. Mrs. Gable, my elderly neighbor who spent most of her time knitting and watching true crime documentaries, peeked her head out. She looked at Courtney, then at the camera, and pulled her door open wider. Then I saw the young couple from apartment 4B step out into the hallway. Courtney did not notice them. She was too focused on the camera lens, spitting her venom at me. "You are a thief, Jasmine," she yelled. "You stole my access. I am going to call the police. I am going to tell them you hacked my accounts. I will have you arrested for cyberstalking." I pressed the talk button again. "The police are already involved, Courtney," I replied, keeping my voice level. "But if I were you, I would be more worried about the FBI. Why don't you go home and ask Terrence where the down payment for that Range Rover parked downstairs really came from? Ask him about the Youth Scholarship Fund. Ask him about the Cayman Islands." She froze. Her mouth hung open for a second, the color draining from her face. The mention of the Range Rover hit a nerve. She loved that car. She built her entire personality around that car. And deep down in the place where she kept her darkest secrets, she knew they couldn't afford it on a non-profit salary. "What did you say?" she whispered, looking around as if the walls were listening. I continued, relentless. "Ask him about the shell companies, Courtney. Or better yet, ask yourself why you signed the incorporation papers for Elite Transport Services. You are the registered agent, aren't you? That makes you liable." Her eyes went wide. She stepped back from the door, her hands trembling. "You are lying," she stammered, but the conviction was gone from her voice. "You are trying to scare me." "I am not trying to scare you," I said. "I am trying to warn you. You are making a scene in a federal investigation, and you have an audience." Courtney spun around. For the first time, she noticed the hallway was not empty. Mrs. Gable was standing there with her phone raised, recording everything. The couple from 4B were also filming, whispering to each other. Courtney looked at them, then down at herself. She realized what she looked like. A privileged, hysterical woman screaming at a closed door in a building she had just called a gutter. "Stop filming me!" she shouted at Mrs. Gable, lunging toward her. "You do not have permission to film me, Mrs." Gable didn't flinch. She just held the phone steadier. "Honey, you are in a public hallway screaming your head off. You gave everyone permission the minute you started banging on that door." Courtney let out a frustrated scream, stomping her foot like a toddler. She looked back at my door, her eyes filled with hate. "This isn't over, Jasmine," she yelled, pointing a manicured finger at the camera. "You will hear from my lawyer. I will sue you for defamation. I will take everything you have." She turned and ran down the hallway, her heels clacking loudly against the tile. I watched on the monitor as she pushed past the neighbors, covering her face with her hand, fleeing the scene of her own destruction. I waited until I heard the heavy fire door at the end of the hall slam shut. Then I watched Mrs. Gable walk over to my door and ring the bell properly. I opened the door. Mrs. Gable looked at me, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "I got it all, sugar," she said, waving her phone. "The threats, the racism, the admission that she thinks the money is hers. Do you want me to send it to you? Or should I just post it on the neighborhood watch page?" I smiled, a genuine smile this time. "Send it to me, Mrs. Gable. It is evidence, but feel free to post it too. I think the community deserves to know who their local celebrities really are." She winked and headed back to her apartment. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a long breath. Courtney thought she had come here to intimidate me. She thought she could use her volume and her status to bully me into submission. Instead, she had just handed me another nail for her coffin. She threatened to sue me for defamation. It was almost funny. In a defamation case, truth is the absolute defense. And I had nothing but the truth. I walked back to my computer. Agent Miller had messaged me. "Audio picked up from your location. We heard everything. That was textbook harassment. We can add a restraining order to the pile if you want." I typed back, "No need. Let her run. She is going back to Terrence now. They are going to turn on each other. Fear makes people selfish." I looked out the window, watching Courtney's Range Rover peel out of the parking lot, nearly hitting a delivery truck. She was driving recklessly. She was panicked. The dominoes were falling faster than I expected. They were not just losing their money, they were losing their minds. And the best part was, I didn't have to lift a finger. I just had to lock my door and let them destroy themselves. Sunday morning at the Greater Hope Tabernacle was not just a religious service, it was a theatrical production starring my father. The sanctuary was packed to capacity, filled with 1,200 souls seeking salvation, unaware they were financing a criminal enterprise. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting multicolored beams onto the polished oak pews and the velvet-lined collection plates. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and old hymnals. I was not sitting in my usual spot in the third row. Instead, I was sitting in my home office, watching the live stream on my largest monitor, a mug of tea in my hand, waiting for the final act of the tragedy to begin. My father, Pastor Otis Sterling, stood behind the crystal pulpit, looking every inch the holy patriarch. He wore a custom-tailored purple robe with gold embroidery symbolizing royalty and divinity. He wiped sweat from his brow with a silk handkerchief, his voice booming through the $1 million sound system that Terrence had overbilled the foundation for. Today's sermon was titled, "The Sin of the Ungrateful Child." It was not subtle. It was a direct public assassination of my character. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that echoed through the silent hall. "The Bible tells us to honor our father and mother, so that our days may be long upon the earth. But what happens when a child bites the hand that fed her? What happens when a daughter raised in the lap of luxury, surrounded by the blessings of this church, turns her back on her blood?" The congregation swayed, murmurs of amen and preach pastor rippling through the crowd. I saw Mrs. Jenkins in the front row shaking her head in disgust, clearly thinking of me. I saw the deacons nodding solemnly. They were all buying it. He was painting me as the prodigal daughter, the rebellious spirit, who had abandoned the family while he was the long-suffering father. He continued, his volume rising. "There are wolves in sheep's clothing, my brothers and sisters. Sometimes the enemy is not out in the world. Sometimes the enemy is in your own house. We have a child who has chosen to attack this ministry, to attack her own brother, to withhold the blessings God intended for this house because of her own greed and jealousy. The camera panned to my mother Betty. She was sitting in the First Lady's box, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She looked the part of the grieving mother perfectly. It made my stomach turn. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying because she knew the bank accounts were frozen and she was terrified of what was coming. Otis raised his hands to the heavens. But we shall not be moved. No weapon formed against us shall prosper. Not even the lies of an ungrateful daughter can stop the work of the Lord. The organist hit a dramatic chord. The choir stood up swaying in their blue robes. The energy in the room was electric. He had them in the palm of his hand. He was using their faith to shield his crimes, using God's name to justify his fraud. I glanced at the second monitor on my desk. It showed the GPS tracking of Agent Miller's unit. The blue dot had just turned onto the main street leading to the church. "Right on time," I whispered. On the main screen, Otis was reaching his crescendo. He was wiping sweat, pacing the stage, shouting about loyalty and divine retribution. "And I say to you today, if you have a rebellious spirit in your home, cast it out. Do not let the poison spread. We must purge the—" He stopped mid-sentence. A low, rumbling boom echoed from the back of the sanctuary, louder than the organ. The heavy double doors at the main entrance, usually closed during the sermon, had been thrown open with such force that they slammed against the walls. The entire congregation turned around. The camera operator, caught off guard, swung the lens toward the back of the room. The silhouette of 20 figures stood in the doorway. They were not ushers. They were not latecomers. They were clad in navy blue tactical gear, wearing Kevlar vests with bright yellow letters across their chests. FBI. The organist stopped playing. The choir stopped swaying. A pin-drop silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. Agent Miller stepped forward. He was not wearing a robe. He was wearing a windbreaker and a badge that caught the light. He did not need a microphone. His voice was trained to command authority. "Otis Sterling." He shouted, his voice cutting through the sanctuary air. "Step away from the pulpit." My father froze. For a second he looked like he didn't understand the language. He blinked, looking out at the sea of confused faces. Then his ego kicked in. He gripped the sides of the crystal pulpit, his knuckles turning white. "How dare you!" Otis bellowed, trying to summon the thunder of God. "This is a house of worship. You have no authority here. Disrespecting the sanctuary of the Lord is a sin." Miller did not blink. He began walking down the center aisle, his heavy boots thudding against the carpet runner. Behind him, the team of agents fanned out, securing the exits. "This is a crime scene," Mr. Sterling, Miller replied, closing the distance. "And I have a federal warrant for your arrest." A collective gasp went up from the 1,200 people in the room. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. My father's face turned from a holy purple to a sickly shade of gray. He looked at the deacons silently, commanding them to intervene. But the deacons were shrinking back into their pews, terrified of the federal agents. "What is the meaning of this?" Otis stammered, his voice losing its power with every step Miller took. Miller reached the steps of the stage. He climbed them slowly, deliberately. He stood face to face with my father. The contrast was striking. The man of gold and silk versus the man of law and steel. Otis Sterling, Miller said loud enough for the first 10 rows to hear clearly. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit racketeering under the RICO Act." "Lies," Otis shouted, turning to the crowd. "These are lies from the enemy. They are trying to silence the church. They are persecuting me because of my faith." Miller didn't argue. He didn't debate theology. He simply reached for his belt and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as he unlocked them echoed through the silent church. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Miller ordered. My father looked at the crowd one last time. He looked for support. He looked for an uprising, but all he saw were phones. Hundreds of smartphones were held up in the air recording his downfall. The same people who were shouting amen a minute ago were now documenting his disgrace. "I am a man of God," Otis screamed, his voice cracking. "Do not touch me." Miller spun him around with practiced efficiency. He pulled my father's arms behind his back, the purple robe bunching up awkwardly. Click, click. The sound of the handcuffs locking was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was better than any hymn. It was the sound of justice. Miller marched my father across the stage. The illusion of the untouchable patriarch shattered instantly. He was just a small, angry man in a costume being led away by the consequences of his own actions. As they walked him down the aisle, passing the very people he had stolen from, the silence broke. "Is it true?" someone shouted from the balcony. "Where is the scholarship money?" Pastor, another voice yelled. My mother Betty was still sitting in her box. As Miller led Otis past her, she stood up, her hands trembling. "Otis," she whispered. "Otis, what do I do?" My father looked at her, his eyes filled with venom. "Call the lawyer, you stupid woman. Do not just stand there." The agents flanked her then. "Mrs. Sterling," another agent said, stepping into her personal space. "We have a warrant for your assets as well. We need you to step outside. The residence is being secured." I watched my mother collapse back onto the bench, burying her face in her hands. The image of the perfect Holy Family had dissolved into a scene of chaos and shame. The live stream feed began to shake as the camera operator realized he should probably stop filming, but he didn't cut the feed. He zoomed in on the empty pulpit. The crystal podium stood alone, bathed in the spotlight, a symbol of the authority that had been abused for decades. I took a sip of my tea. It was still warm. In the chat section of the live stream, the comments were flying by so fast I couldn't read them all. Karma. I knew something was wrong with those finances. Justice for Jasmine. I paused at that last one. Someone knew. Someone had connected the dots. I closed the laptop. The show was over. The sermon on the ungrateful child had ended with the father in chains. It was poetic. It was biblical. He had spent years preaching about the apocalypse, about the day of judgment, when all secrets would be revealed. He just never thought that his judgment day would come on a Sunday morning in Atlanta, and that the judge would be his own daughter. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the world was continuing as normal. Birds were singing, cars were driving by, but for the Sterling family, the world had just ended. I felt a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. The heavy blanket of their expectations, their judgment, their hypocrisy, it was all gone. The phone on my desk rang. It was Miller. "We have him, Jasmine. He is in custody. We are heading to the station. Are you ready for the next phase?" I looked at the blank screen where my father's face had been moments ago. "I was born ready, Miller. Let's finish this." I grabbed my keys. It was time to go to the police station, not to bail him out, but to watch him realize that no amount of prayer could unlock a federal jail cell. The observation room at the federal building was cold and smelled faintly of stale coffee and ozone. I stood in the dark, my arms crossed over my chest, staring through the thick pane of one-way glass into interrogation room 1. It was a surreal experience to stand on this side of the mirror. For years, my family had looked at me like I was invisible, like I was a piece of furniture in their grand life. Now I was the only one who could see everything, and they were the ones on display. Inside the stark gray room, my brother Terrence sat hunched over a metal table. The golden child, the prince of the Sterling dynasty, looked like a frightened little boy. His expensive Italian suit jacket was crumpled on the floor in the corner. His tie was loosened, hanging around his neck, like a noose he had tied himself. Sweat had soaked through his dress shirt, creating dark patches under his arms. Agent Miller sat across from him, perfectly calm, flipping through a file folder with agonizing slowness. I watched Terrence's leg bouncing nervously under the table. He kept looking at the door, then at the mirror, unaware that I was standing right there, watching his collapse. Miller finally spoke, his voice coming through the speaker in my room with crystal clarity. "We have the logs from the Cayman Islands, Terrence. We know about the transfer attempts you made this morning. We know about the shell companies, Elite Transport Services, Sterling Consulting. It is all here." Terrence let out a sob that sounded more like a choke. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "I did not do it," he stammered, his voice high and thin. "It wasn't my idea. I just signed the papers. That is all I did. I just signed where they told me to sign." Miller leaned forward. "Who is they, Terrence? You are the CEO. You are the CFO. Your name is on every document." "It was Dad," Terrence screamed, slamming his hand on the table. "It was all Otis. He set it up. He told me how to move the money. He said it was standard practice for tax optimization. I do not know anything about accounting. I just wanted to make him proud. He forced me into this role. I wanted to open a restaurant, but he made me run the foundation." I shook my head slowly. It took less than 2 hours for Terrence to sell out the father he claimed to worship. All that talk about loyalty, about family legacy, it evaporated the moment he realized he couldn't buy his way out of this room. "He is a bully," Terrence continued, tears streaming down his face now. "He hits people. You saw what he did to Jasmine. He hits me too. He threatened to cut me off if I didn't move the money offshore. Please, I am a victim here. I am just a puppet." Miller looked at the mirror, making eye contact with me, even though Terrence couldn't see it. He gave a subtle nod. I signaled the technician to switch the audio feed to interrogation room 2. My father was a different story. Otis was not crying. He was sitting bolt upright, his posture rigid, his hands clasped on the table as if he were about to lead a prayer. He looked at the 2 junior agents across from him with pure disdain. "This is a misunderstanding of biblical proportions," Otis boomed, trying to summon the authority he used in the pulpit. "I am a spiritual leader. My concern is the salvation of souls, not the minutiae of bookkeeping." One of the agents pushed a photo across the table. It was a picture of the vacation home in the Bahamas purchased with foundation funds. "And this, Mr. Sterling?" the agent asked. "Is this for the salvation of souls?" Otis didn't even blink. "That is a retreat center for burnt-out clergy. It is a ministry asset. If there are financial irregularities, you need to speak to my son. Terrence is the chief financial officer. He handles all the transactions. I have tried to guide him, but he is greedy. He has always been weak-willed. I suspect he has been skimming from the ministry to fund his lavish lifestyle and that high-maintenance wife of his." My jaw tightened. I watched my father throw his golden child under the bus without a moment of hesitation. He didn't care about Terrence. He didn't care about anyone. He would sacrifice his own flesh and blood to keep his reputation intact. He was painting himself as the naive, trusting pastor betrayed by a greedy son. "It is tragic, really," Otis said, shaking his head with mock sadness. "I trusted him with the Lord's treasury, and he plundered it. If crimes were committed, they were committed by Terrence Sterling. I wash my hands of it." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This was the man I had spent my whole life trying to please. This was the man whose approval I had craved. He was a monster. He wasn't protecting the family. He was a parasite, feeding on us until we were dry and then discarding the husks. I had seen enough. The men in my family were cowards. One was crying and the other was lying. I turned to Miller, who had just walked into the observation room. "What about Courtney?" I asked. Miller sighed. "She is in room 3. She is playing the dumb housewife card. Says she doesn't know what a shell company is. Says she thought the money came from book sales." I laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet room. "Courtney has an MBA, Miller. She knows exactly what a shell company is. She drafted the bylaws for 3 of them." Miller handed me a visitor badge. "Do you want to go in?" I took the badge and clipped it to my blazer. "Yes, I want her to look me in the eye." I walked down the hallway, the sound of my heels clicking on the linoleum echoing the rhythm of my heartbeat. I stopped in front of the heavy steel door marked Interview Room 3. I took a deep breath, composing my face into a mask of professional indifference. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Courtney was sitting at the table, her head in her hands. When she heard the door open, she looked up, expecting another federal agent. When she saw it was me, her expression went through a complex series of gymnastics. First shock, then anger, and finally a desperate, calculating hope. She looked terrible. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in black streaks. Her hair was a mess. The arrogance she had displayed at my apartment door was gone, replaced by the feral look of a trapped animal. "Jasmine," she gasped, standing up and reaching for me. "Thank God you are here. You have to help me. These people are crazy. They are saying terrible things." I didn't move. I didn't reach back. I stood by the door, my arms at my sides. "Sit down, Courtney," I said calmly. She froze, sensing the coldness in my voice, and slowly sank back into her chair. "Jasmine, listen to me," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know how Terrence is. You know I didn't have anything to do with the business. I just signed what he told me to sign. I was trying to be a good wife, just like you were trying to be a good daughter. We are victims of these men, Jasmine. Us girls need to stick together." I stared at her, marveling at her ability to pivot. An hour ago, I was a jealous, bitter gutter rat. Now I was her sister, her ally against the patriarchy. "You signed the incorporation papers for Elite Transport, Courtney," I said. "I saw your signature. I saw the notary stamp. You are the registered agent." She waved her hand dismissively. "That was just paperwork. Terrence said it was for tax purposes." I didn't know he was stealing. "Jasmine, you have to talk to them. You are an auditor. You can explain that I didn't understand what I was signing. You can tell them I am innocent." She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me with disgust when I was bleeding on her rug. "You stood on the stairs, Courtney," I said softly. "You watched my father drag me by my hair, and you worried about your rug." Courtney flinched. That was shock. I was in shock. I didn't mean it. "I love you, Jasmine. You are my sister. We are family. Family helps each other." She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Her skin was cold and clammy. "Please," she begged. "I cannot go to prison. I cannot wear those orange jumpsuits. I have a reputation. Just tell them I cooperated. Tell them I helped you find the files." I looked down at her hand, gripping mine. I remembered all the times she had made fun of my clothes, my job, my lack of a husband. I remembered how she treated the waiters, the staff, and me. I slowly pulled my hand away from hers. "You want to help me?" I asked. "Yes. Anything." Courtney nodded frantically. "Then tell the truth," I said. "Not the version where you are a victim. The version where you spent $50,000 of scholarship money on handbags." Her face hardened. The mask slipped again. "You bitch," she hissed. "You are enjoying this, aren't you? You planned this whole thing." I leaned down until my face was inches from hers. "I didn't plan for you to be a criminal, Courtney. I just planned to turn on the lights. Whatever scurries away in the dark is not my problem." I stood up and turned to the two-way mirror. "Agent Miller," I said to the glass. "She is ready to talk about the handbags now." I walked out of the room, leaving Courtney screaming my name behind the heavy steel door. As I walked back down the hallway, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The family myth was dead. The loyalty was a lie. And for the first time in my life, I was absolutely free. The steel table between us felt less like furniture and more like a battlefield. I sat down slowly, placing a thick manila folder on the cold metal surface. I did not open it immediately. I just rested my hand on top of it, watching Courtney squirm. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a stark, unforgiving sound that seemed to amplify the silence in the room. Courtney wiped her nose with a crumpled tissue, her eyes darting from the two-way mirror to my face, searching for a lifeline. Jasmine, seriously, she started, her voice pitching up into that whining tone she usually reserved for when a waiter brought her the wrong vintage of wine. You have to tell them to stop. This is ridiculous. I have a Pilates class at 4. I cannot be here all day answering questions about things I do not understand. I stared at her, marveling at the disconnect. She was sitting in a federal interrogation room facing decades in prison, and she was worried about Pilates. It was a testament to how deeply insulated her life had been. She truly believed that consequences were things that happened to other people, to poor people, not to women who wore silk scarves and drove Range Rovers. I am just a housewife, Jasmine. She continued, gaining a little more confidence when I didn't interrupt her. I take care of the home. I support my husband. Terrence handles the business. I do not know a debit from a credit. I just sign where he points. That is not a crime, is it? Being a supportive wife is not a crime. She offered me a weak, conspiratorial smile, the kind of smile that said, "You understand, right? We are just women. Men handle the complicated stuff." I finally spoke, my voice low and even. "Drop the act, Courtney." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me." I opened the folder. I did not slide it across to her. I began to lay out the documents one by one like a tarot reader, revealing a grim future. Exhibit A, I said, placing a document in the center of the table. The Articles of Incorporation for Sterling Consulting Group, LLC. Registered in the state of Delaware 3 years ago. I pointed to the bottom of the page. The signature was bold, loopy, and unmistakably hers. That is your signature, Courtney, and right there listed as the managing member and registered agent is your name. Not Terrence's. Yours. She stared at the paper, her face paling. I do not remember that. Terrence probably put it in front of me with a stack of other papers. I told you I just sign things. I laid down the next document. Exhibit B. A consulting agreement between Hope for Youth Foundation and Sterling Consulting Group. The foundation paid your company $10,000 a month for strategic visioning services. I looked her dead in the eye. What strategic visioning did you provide, Courtney? Did you submit reports? Did you hold meetings? Did you do anything other than deposit the checks? She stammered, pulling at a loose thread on her jacket. We talked about the vision at dinner. We discussed the future of the youth center. That counts as consulting. Dinner table conversation is not a billable service, I said coldly. But let's move on to the spending. Because this is where the housewife defense really falls apart. I pulled out a stack of stapled papers. These were the bank statements for the shell company she claimed she knew nothing about. I had highlighted the transactions in neon yellow. They glowed under the harsh lights like radioactive waste. Here we have a transaction from 6 months ago, I said, reading from the line item. Saks Fifth Avenue, $5,400. I pulled a photo from the file. It was a screenshot from her Instagram. She was posing with a new designer trench coat, tagging Saks in the post. The date of the purchase matches the date of the post I noted. I flipped the page. Here is a charge for VIP tickets to the Essence Festival in New Orleans. $3,000. I pulled another screenshot. Courtney and Terrence holding drinks in a VIP booth, smiling like royalty. And here, I said, placing the final, most damning piece of paper on the table. This is the invoice for the Range Rover you drove to my apartment yesterday. The one you used to flee the scene after you screamed at me. The lease is in the name of Sterling Consulting Group. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. You see the problem, Courtney? You claim you are just a naive housewife who doesn't understand business, but you certainly understood how to spend the money. You understood how to drive the car. You understood how to wear the coat. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot enjoy the fruits of the crime and then claim ignorance of the tree. Courtney was shaking now. A real deep tremor that started in her hands and spread to her shoulders. The reality was finally piercing through her bubble of delusion. But Terrence said it was okay, she whispered, tears spilling over again. He said it was a perk. He said the foundation owed us. I leaned forward, my face inches from hers across the table. The foundation is a non-profit, Courtney. It is funded by donations from grandmothers who survive on Social Security. It is funded by grants meant to keep kids off the street. It does not owe you a Range Rover. Taking that money is not a perk. It is theft. It is embezzlement. And because you moved the money across state lines to pay for that festival trip, it is federal wire fraud. I let the words hang in the air. Theft. Embezzlement. Wire fraud. I watched her process them. I watched her realize that her MBA, the degree she bragged about constantly, was actually working against her. A jury would never believe that a woman with a master's in business administration didn't understand the basics of corporate governance. "You are not a housewife, Courtney," I said, delivering the line I had been waiting to say for years. "You are an accomplice, a first-degree co-conspirator in a racketeering enterprise." She flinched as if I had slapped her. "Do you know what the sentencing guidelines are for the amount of money you stole?" I asked, my voice clinically detached. "We are looking at over $500,000 in misappropriated funds. That carries a mandatory minimum. You are looking at 8 to 10 years in federal prison." "Prison," she choked out. "No. No, I cannot go to prison. I have a life. I have friends. Your friends are currently deleting your number from their phones," I said brutally. "And as for your life, the government is seizing it. The car, the clothes, the jewelry. It is all proceeds of crime. It is gone." I stood up, signaling that I was done. "Enjoy the jumpsuit, Courtney. I hear orange is very in this season." I turned to leave. I had my hand on the doorknob when she broke. It was a complete structural collapse of her ego. "Wait!" she screamed, leaping up from her chair. I stopped but didn't turn around. "Do not leave," she begged, her voice hysterical. "I can explain. It wasn't just me, it was mostly him. It was Terrence." I slowly turned back to face her. She was standing by the table, her hands gripping the edge so hard her knuckles were white. Her eyes were wild. "Terrence made me do it." She rushed on the words, tumbling out over each other. "He told me if I didn't sign the papers, he would leave me. He said he needed the shell companies to hide money from Otis. He said Otis was taking too big of a cut and we deserved more." I raised an eyebrow. "So you admit there was a plan, a conspiracy?" "Yes, yes, but it was his plan," she cried. "He has a ledger, a real one, not the one on the computer. He keeps it in a safe deposit box at the bank on 4th Street. He didn't tell Otis about it. He has gold coins in there too. And cash, lots of cash." I felt a surge of triumph. This was new information. A secret ledger, gold coins. Terrence had been holding out on everyone, even his father. "Where is the key, Courtney?" I asked softly. She fumbled with the necklace she was wearing. It was a long gold chain with a heavy pendant. She unclasped it with shaking fingers and pulled the pendant open. Inside was a small flat key. "He told me to keep it safe," she sobbed, holding it out to me. "He said if anything ever happened, I should go get the box and run. But I don't want to run. I just want to go home. Please, Jasmine, I gave you the key. Tell them I helped. Tell them I am not like him." I walked back to the table and took the key from her palm. It was warm from her skin. This little piece of metal was the final nail in Terrence's coffin. It proved premeditation. It proved he knew exactly what he was doing. Courtney looked at me with pathetic hope. "Did I do good? Will they let me go now?" I looked at the woman who had called me a gutter rat yesterday. The woman who had sneered at my pain. She was willing to send her husband to prison for an extra 10 years, just to save her own skin. "You did the right thing for the investigation, Courtney," I said, slipping the key into my pocket. "Agent Miller will be in shortly to take your official statement. Make sure you tell him everything you just told me. Do not leave anything out." "But what about me?" she wailed. "What about my deal?" "That is up to the judge," I said, walking to the door. "But my advice, don't make plans for Pilates anytime soon." I walked out of the interrogation room and closed the heavy steel door. Through the small window, I saw Courtney collapse back into her chair, putting her head on the table, sobbing uncontrollably. I turned to Agent Miller, who was waiting in the hallway with a satisfied grin. "She gave up the safety deposit box," I said, handing him the key. "Fourth Street Bank, physical ledger and gold." Miller whistled low. "That is the smoking gun. Good work, Jasmine. You broke her in under 10 minutes. I looked back at the door one last time. She was already broken, Miller. She was just held together by money and hairspray. Once we took those away, there was nothing left but fear." We walked down the hallway together, the sound of justice ringing in my ears. The family that prayed together was now turning on each other, just as I knew they would. And I was going to make sure every single secret they tried to hide was dragged into the light. By the time I walked out of the interrogation room, the world outside had changed completely. While I was breaking Courtney down piece by piece inside the federal building, the internet was dismantling my family on the outside. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, had kept her promise. She had uploaded the video of Courtney screaming at my door to the neighborhood watch page, but from there it had migrated to TikTok and then to Twitter. It had gone viral in less than 4 hours. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the federal building and opened my phone. The video had millions of views. The thumbnail was a blurry shot of Courtney's face twisted in rage, her finger pointing at the camera. The caption read, "Pastor's wife screams at sister-in-law, calls apartment a gutter while driving stolen Range Rover." I scrolled through the comments. The internet is a cruel place, but sometimes it is a necessary instrument of justice. The community was not having it. Black Twitter had dragged Courtney for filth. They dissected her outfit, her hair, and most importantly, her audacity. People were pulling up the price of her jacket and contrasting it with the broken air conditioning in the church sanctuary. But the anger wasn't just directed at Courtney, it was blowing back on Otis. The video had opened the floodgates. People who had been silent for years were now emboldened to speak. I saw comments from former church members telling stories of how my father had bullied them into giving more tithes, even when they couldn't afford groceries. A contractor posted that he was never paid for repairing the church steps 3 years ago. The hashtag Pastor Predator was trending locally. I watched as the digital mob tore down the pedestal my father had spent 40 years building. It wasn't just strangers, it was people we knew. I saw a post from Mrs. Johnson, the head of the usher board. She wrote, "I have served under Pastor Sterling for 20 years, and today I am ashamed. He drove a Bentley while I took the bus to clean his church. The truth is, the light." My phone rang. It was not a number I wanted to see. It was the landline from my parents' house. I stared at the screen for a long moment. I debated letting it go to voicemail. I had done my job. I had given the evidence to the feds. I didn't owe them anything else. But a part of me, the part that was still hurting, needed to hear it. I needed to hear the desperation in her voice to know that it was finally real. I answered, but I didn't say anything. I just listened to the breathing on the other end. "Jasmine, is that you?" It was my mother, Betty. Her voice was shaking so hard she sounded like she was freezing to death. "I am here," I said simply. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed. "Jasmine, you have to do something. It is a nightmare out here. There are news vans parked at the gate. I cannot even go to the grocery store." I looked out the window of my car at the passing traffic. "What do you want me to do, Mother?" "You have to fix this," she said, her voice rising in panic. "You have to put out a statement. Tell them the video is out of context. Tell them Courtney was just having a bad day. Tell them your father is a good man. You are the only one they will listen to right now. You are the victim, so if you forgive us, they will have to back off." I almost laughed. It was tragic, really. Even now, with her husband in handcuffs and her daughter-in-law confessing to federal crimes, she was still trying to manage the public relations. She still thought this was a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with a nice press release and a Sunday hat. "They kicked me out of the Women's Guild, Jasmine," she cried when I didn't answer. "Sister Patterson called me 10 minutes ago. She said I am no longer welcome to lead the prayer breakfast." Me, the First Lady of the church. They said I am complicit. They said I enjoyed the stolen money just as much as Otis did. Did you? I asked quietly. What did you enjoy the money, Mother? Did you enjoy the trips to the Bahamas? Did you enjoy the new kitchen? Did you never once ask yourself where it came from when the church roof was leaking? I trusted my husband, she screamed, shrill and defensive. That is what a biblical wife does. I submitted to his leadership. I didn't ask questions. That is not a crime. Willful ignorance is not a defense, I said, reciting the line I had learned in law school. And neither is submission when you are submitting to a criminal. Jasmine, please, she begged, her voice breaking. They are coming to seize the house. Miller said they are going to padlock the doors by tomorrow evening. I have nowhere to go. My friends won't answer my calls. Even my sister said I should be ashamed of myself. You have an apartment. You have room. Please let me come stay with you just until this blows over. I closed my eyes. I pictured my apartment, my sanctuary, the place Courtney had called a gutter, the place where I had healed my own wounds in silence. And then I pictured the night of the party. I saw myself on the floor, blood dripping from my nose. I saw my father's hand tangled in my hair. And I saw my mother standing by the buffet table, covering her mouth with a napkin, looking away because she didn't want to make a scene. You cannot come here, Mother, I said, my voice steady and hard as stone. But I am your mother, she wailed. How can you be so cruel? I gave you life. And you watched Dad almost take it away. I cut her off. You stood there. You watched him punch me in the face. You watched him drag me across the floor like an animal. You didn't scream. You didn't try to stop him. You didn't even call me afterward to see if I was alive. You only called me when the money ran out. That was different, she stammered. He was angry. You provoked him. I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down. I just pressed the red button ending the call and the connection. She called back immediately. I declined it. Then I blocked the number. I sat there in the silence of my car feeling a strange sensation. It wasn't guilt. For 32 years, I had been trained to feel guilty for their unhappiness. I had been trained to set myself on fire to keep them warm. But the fire was out. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Mrs. Gable, my neighbor. Honey, I just saw the news. They are taking your dad out in cuffs on live TV. And guess what? The church board just released a statement. They are suing your father to get the money back. The whole hood is talking about you, but they are saying you are the only one with a backbone. Keep your head up. I smiled. The community I thought would judge me had actually rallied behind me. They didn't hate me for exposing the pastor. They respected me for protecting the truth. I started the car engine. I had one more stop to make before I went home. I needed to go to the courthouse. I had been called as an expert witness for the upcoming grand jury hearing. My mother was right about one thing. I was the only one people would listen to now. But I wasn't going to use my voice to save her reputation. I was going to use it to ensure that the people she and my father had exploited finally got their justice. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked in the rearview mirror. The federal building loomed large and gray behind me, holding the wreckage of my family inside. I didn't look back for long. The road ahead was clear, and for the first time in my life I was driving it alone, and I had never felt more at peace. The price of truth is high, they say. It cost me my parents. It cost me my brother. But as I drove toward the sunset, knowing that my integrity was intact, I realized it was a bargain. I would have paid double. The community had spoken. The congregation had woken up. And the Sterling family legacy, built on lies and intimidation, had finally crumbled into dust. All it took was one punch and one phone call to bring it all down. The witness stand in federal court is a lonely place, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel alone. I felt formidable. The courtroom was packed. The air conditioning hummed with a low, sterile drone that chilled the skin, but my blood was running hot. I smoothed the lapel of my navy blazer. It was a sharp contrast to the purple robes my father used to wear to command attention. Today he was wearing an orange jumpsuit issued by the state. He sat at the defense table flanked by a court-appointed lawyer who looked exhausted. Terrence sat next to him looking like a ghost of the man who used to drive a Ferrari. Courtney was at the far end of the table, her roots showing, her makeup minimal, trying to look like the victim she claimed to be. "State your name and occupation for the record." The prosecutor's voice cut through the silence. "Jasmine Sterling. I am a senior forensic auditor specializing in corporate fraud and money laundering." I did not stutter. I did not whisper. I spoke with the clarity of a bell tolling. For the next 3 hours, I did not look at my family. I looked at the jury. 12 ordinary citizens who had been pulled from their lives to untangle the web of greed my father had spun. Behind me, a large projector screen displayed the work of my life. It was a flow chart, a massive, intricate diagram of arrows and boxes that looked like a map of a subway system. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," I began, pointing to the top of the chart. "What you see here is the illusion. This box represents the Hope for Youth Foundation. This is where the donations came in. The widow's mite, the corporate grants, the government subsidies." I moved the laser pointer down. "And this is where the money was supposed to go. Scholarship funds, community outreach, food pantries." I paused, letting the red dot hover over the empty boxes. "But as you can see from the forensic trace, less than 5% of the capital ever reached these destinations. Instead, it entered what we call the layering phase." I walked the jury through the maze. I explained how my father set up shell companies that sounded legitimate but existed only on paper. I explained how Terrence built the foundation for transport services that never happened. I explained how Courtney billed for consulting fees that were actually payments for designer clothes and spa treatments. I used simple words. I didn't want to confuse them. I wanted them to be angry. "They took the money meant for books and bought a Bentley," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "They took the money meant for a soup kitchen and bought a vacation home in the Bahamas. They moved the money from Atlanta to Delaware to the Cayman Islands, and then back again in the form of loans to themselves. It is a classic washing cycle. Rinse, dry, spin." As I spoke, I could feel eyes burning into the side of my head. I finally turned to look at the defense table. My father was staring at me. But it wasn't the look I was used to. It wasn't the look of contempt he gave me when I refused to sign a loan. It wasn't the look of rage he gave me before he punched me. It was fear. For the first time in his life, Otis Sterling was looking at me and seeing me. He wasn't seeing the quiet, obedient daughter who sat in the back of the church. He wasn't seeing the bean counter he made fun of at dinner parties. He was seeing an intellect that far surpassed his own. He was realizing that while he was busy charming the masses, I was busy studying the math. He was realizing that the very thing he despised about me, my obsession with details, was the sword that was currently cutting his head off. His mouth hung slightly open. He looked at the chart, then he looked at me, then back at the chart. The realization was written all over his face. He had underestimated the most dangerous person in the room. I finished my testimony with a final devastating statistic. In total, the defendants misappropriated $4.2 million over a period of 7 years. This is not negligence. This is not a mistake. This is a calculated, systemic enterprise designed to defraud the community for personal gain. I stepped down from the stand. The silence in the room was heavy. The jury looked at the defense table with pure disgust. The deliberations took less than 4 hours. When the jury returned, the foreman did not look at the defendants. That is always the sign. The judge asked the defendants to rise. My father stood up, shaking. Terrence had to be helped up by his lawyer. Courtney was already crying silently, tears ruining the humble act she was trying to play. On count 1, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, the jury finds the defendant Otis Sterling guilty. On count 2, money laundering, the jury finds the defendant Otis Sterling guilty. On count 3, racketeering, the jury finds the defendant Otis Sterling guilty. The word guilty rang out like a hammer blow over and over again. 27 counts in total. Then came the sentencing. The judge looked at my father over his glasses. Mr. Sterling, you used the name of God to rob the poor. You abused the trust of your community and your family. I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison. 25 years. My father gasped. He would be an old man when he got out, if he got out at all. He slumped into his chair, putting his head in his hands. The judge turned to Terrence. Terrence Sterling, you were the financial architect of this scheme. You claim you were coerced, but the evidence shows you enjoyed the fruits of these crimes willingly. I sentence you to 15 years. Terrence let out a wail that echoed off the high ceiling. And finally, Courtney. Courtney Sterling, you claimed ignorance, but your signature is on the documents that facilitated this theft. You were an active participant in hiding these assets. I sentence you to 8 years, Courtney screamed. It was a sharp, piercing sound. She turned to the gallery looking for anyone to save her, but there was no one. Her friends were gone. Her family was gone. The judge banged his gavel. Furthermore, all assets seized by the federal government, including the primary residence, the vehicles and the offshore accounts, are hereby forfeited to pay restitution to the victims. It was over. Everything was gone. The mansion, the cars, the status, the legacy. I watched the marshals move in. They handcuffed my father first. He looked back at me one last time. His eyes were pleading now. He mouthed my name. Jasmine. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just watched. I watched them cuff Terrence, who was sobbing uncontrollably, calling for his daddy to fix it. But his daddy was in cuffs too. I watched them cuff Courtney, who was hyperventilating, shouting that she couldn't breathe, that she was claustrophobic. As they were led out through the side door, the heavy oak door that leads to the holding cells, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. You can't be happy watching your family go to prison. It was relief. It was the feeling of a heavy pack being taken off your back after a long hike up a steep mountain. I walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. The press was there. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in my face. Ms. Sterling, how do you feel? Do you have a comment on your father's sentence? Do you hate your family? I stopped. I looked into the nearest camera lens. I do not hate them, I said quietly. I just hate what they did. And today the math finally added up. I pushed past the reporters and walked out the front doors of the courthouse. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the concrete steps. I took a deep breath of fresh air. It tasted like freedom. I walked to my car, my heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement. I had no home to go back to for dinner. No family gatherings to attend. No sermons to listen to. I was an orphan by choice. And it was the best decision I had ever made. The empire had fallen. And from the ashes, I was the only one left standing. The estate auction was held on a Tuesday morning, under a sky that threatened rain. It was fitting weather for the funeral of the Sterling dynasty. The massive iron gates of my childhood home, which had always been closed to keep the riffraff out, were now wide open. A sign staked into the manicured lawn read, "Federal Asset Forfeiture Auction. Open to the public." Strangers were walking up the driveway, trampling the azaleas my mother had prized so dearly. I parked my car on the street and walked up the long winding path. I wasn't here to buy back my past. I wasn't here to reclaim the family silver or the antique furniture. I was here to witness the final dismantling of the illusion. The front lawn looked like a yard sale for the corrupt. Tables were set up in rows covered with the detritus of my family's greed. I walked past a rack of Courtney's designer dresses. The Burberry trench coat she had worn to intimidate me was hanging there, tagged with a yellow sticker that said $100. A woman in sweatpants was examining it, checking the seams, bargaining with the auctioneer. "It is a little stained," the woman said, pointing to a spot on the lapel. It was probably a wine stain from one of Courtney's many lunches, or maybe a tear stain from when the marshals dragged her away. It didn't matter. The coat that had once symbolized her superiority was now just used clothing. I kept walking. I saw Terrence's golf clubs. I saw the crystal decanter set he had thrown on the floor of his office. It had been glued back together, but the cracks were visible. And then I saw the house itself. The front doors were open, revealing the grand foyer where I had been dragged by my hair. Strangers were walking through the rooms, judging the wallpaper, criticizing the fixtures. The sanctity of the Sterling mansion was gone. It was just a building now, a hollow shell. I stood by the fountain which had been drained and was filled with dead leaves. I watched as a man loaded my father's massive oak desk onto a truck. The desk where he had planned his crimes. The desk where he had hit me. It was being sold for scrap wood prices. Jasmine. The voice was small, brittle, and familiar. I turned around. My mother Betty was standing near the garage. I almost didn't recognize her. She was wearing a plain gray cardigan and slacks that looked like they came from a discount store. Her hair, usually dyed and coiffed, was gray at the roots and pulled back into a severe bun. She looked 20 years older than she had a month ago. She was holding a small box of personal items, the few things the government had allowed her to keep. Old photos, Bibles, knick-knacks with no monetary value. "Hello, Mother," I said. She looked at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and hollow. "You came to gloat?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and misery. "You came to watch them sell your father's life." "I came to say goodbye," I corrected her. "Not to him. To this place. To the fear." She let out a bitter laugh. "Fear. You were never afraid, Jasmine. You were always cold. You were always calculating. You planned this. You planned for us to lose everything. I didn't plan for you to be criminals, Mother. I just stopped covering for you." She stepped closer, her face twisting into a scowl. "Look at me, Jasmine. Look at what you did. I am 60 years old. I have nothing. No husband, no son, no home. I have to live in a studio apartment in the city. I have to take the bus. Is that what you wanted? To see your mother on the bus?" I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the woman who had ignored my pain for decades. I saw the woman who had chosen comfort over conscience. "I wanted you to see me," I said softly. "When I was bleeding on the floor, I wanted you to see me. When I was begging for your help, I wanted you to see me. But you only saw the rug. You only saw the scandal." "That is the past," she screamed, drawing the attention of a few auction-goers. "Why can't you let it go? Why do you have to be so cruel?" "Tearing this family apart is not justice, Jasmine. It is vengeance. It is pure, hateful vengeance." I felt a calmness settle over me. For years her words would have cut me deep. They would have made me question myself. But today, standing amidst the wreckage of their lies, I saw the truth clearly. I took a step toward her. "Tarnished silver is not cruel, Mother," I said, my voice steady. "Selling a house is not cruel. Do you want to know what cruel is?" I pointed to the spot on the driveway where I had fallen that night. "Cruel is watching your husband punch your daughter in the face and doing nothing. Cruel is letting your son steal from hungry children so he can drive a sports car. Cruel is calling your daughter a gutter rat because she refuses to be an accomplice to fraud." My mother flinched, clutching her box of memories to her chest. "We made mistakes," she whispered, "but we are still your parents." "No," I said firmly. "You were my captors, and I just broke out." I looked at the auctioneer who was now holding up the family portrait that used to hang over the fireplace. It was a painting of all of us smiling, looking perfect. "Otis, Betty, Terrence, and me. Who will start the bidding at $10, the auctioneer shouted. $10 for this lovely frame. The painting comes with it." No one raised their hand. $10. $5. Anyone's silence. "No one wants it," I said to my mother. No one wants the lie anymore. Not even for $5. I turned away from her. I walked back down the winding path past the strangers, past the sold signs, past the remnants of the life I was supposed to want. Jasmine, my mother called out after me. Where are you going? You cannot just leave me here. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I am going to work, Mother. I called back over my shoulder. I have a life to build, a real one. I reached my car and got in. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. I saw my mother standing alone on the driveway, a small gray figure against the backdrop of the massive empty house. She looked small. She looked defeated. But for the first time, she didn't look like a giant to me. She was just a woman who had made bad choices and was now living with the consequences. I turned the corner and the house disappeared from view. The rain finally began to fall, washing the streets clean. I turned on my windshield wipers and turned up the radio. The song playing was upbeat, something about new beginnings. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel. I had lost a family, yes, but I had found myself. And as the auctioneer's gavel fell one last time in the distance, I knew that the price I paid for my freedom was worth every single penny. The debt was paid, the ledger was balanced, and I was finally in the black. It has been exactly 365 days since the gavel fell in that federal courtroom. A year is a long time in the life of a woman who has decided to be free. I am sitting in my new office now. It is located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Atlanta. The view is breathtaking. I can see the entire city spread out below me, a sprawling grid of lights and possibilities. But the most important thing about this office is not the view. It is the name on the door. Jasmine Sterling, Senior Financial Crimes Advisor. After the trial, the FBI didn't just thank me. They hired me. Agent Miller, who is now my direct supervisor, told me that my work on the Sterling case was the most thorough forensic accounting he had seen in 20 years. I now lead a special task force dedicated to uncovering fraud in religious and nonprofit organizations. Every day I help other victims, other scapegoats find the hidden money that their abusers are using to control them. It is not just a job, it is a calling. But the justice I received wasn't just professional, it was financial too. Under the federal whistleblower laws, specifically the IRS code regarding tax fraud, the person who provides the evidence leading to a conviction and recovery of assets is entitled to a percentage of the funds recovered. Because my father and brother had stolen so much, and because the government seized everything, my share was substantial. When the check arrived, I stared at it for a long time. It was more money than I had ever earned in my entire career. It was blood money in a way, extracted from the wreckage of my family. I knew I couldn't spend it on shoes or cars. That was Courtney's way. That was the Sterling way. I had to purify it. So I did the one thing my father pretended to do, but never actually did. I started a scholarship. The Jasmine Sterling Grant for Financial Literacy is real. It is fully funded. And it has one specific mission. We pay for the tuition of young Black women who want to study accounting, finance, or law. But more than that, we teach them how to protect themselves. We teach them that understanding money is the highest form of self-defense. Last week, I handed out the first 10 checks to 10 brilliant young women. Seeing the hope in their eyes healed a part of me that I didn't know was still broken. My personal life has changed just as much as my professional one. I moved out of the apartment building where Courtney screamed at my door. I bought a penthouse in Midtown. It has high ceilings, walls of windows, and absolutely no rugs that I have to worry about bleeding on. It is a space of light and peace. But I am not alone in this big house. As I type this, there is a warm weight resting on my feet. His name is Justice. He is a golden retriever mix I adopted from the shelter the day after I moved in. He had been abused by his previous owners. He was skittish and afraid of loud noises, But with time, patience, and love, he has learned to trust again. In healing him, I think I have healed myself. He doesn't care about my job title. He doesn't care about my family drama. He just loves me because I am me. That is the only kind of loyalty I accept in my life now. This morning, however, the past tried to knock on my door one last time. I received a letter from the federal penitentiary. The envelope was yellow and cheap. The handwriting was familiar, though it looked shakier than I remembered. It was from Terrence. I sat at my marble kitchen island, justice sleeping at my feet, and opened it. The letter was 3 pages long. It started with complaints. He complained about the food. He complained about the other inmates. He complained that his court-appointed lawyer wasn't answering his calls. He complained that Courtney hadn't visited him once. And then on the last page came the ask. Jasmine, he wrote, I know we had our differences, but I am your brother. I am suffering in here. I need money for the commissary. I need snacks. I need toiletries. The family accounts are gone. You are the only one with money now. Please. Dad is in the other block and he is not doing well. Do it for him if not for me. Just a few $1,000s. It is nothing to you now. I read the words, feeling the ghost of my old self rising up. The old Jasmine, the one who craved their approval, might have felt a twinge of guilt. She might have thought, well, they are in prison, maybe I should show mercy. But the new Jasmine, the woman who brought down an empire, she felt nothing but pity mixed with disgust. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was about money. He still thought that our relationship was a transaction. He didn't apologize for the abuse. He didn't apologize for the theft. He just wanted a handout. He was still the golden child, expecting the world to cater to him even from behind bars. I stood up and walked to the shredder I keep in my home office. I didn't reply. I didn't send a check. I didn't even finish reading the postscript. I fed the letter into the machine. I watched as the yellow paper turned into confetti. The sound of the blade slicing through his handwriting was the final closure I needed. I am not your banker anymore, Terrence, I whispered to the empty room. And I am certainly not your victim. I walked out to the balcony. The sun was setting, painting the Atlanta skyline in shades of gold and violet. I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. I was 33 years old. I was wealthy. I was respected. I was free. The phone in my pocket buzzed. It was a text from one of my scholarship students thanking me for the opportunity. I smiled. This was my legacy now. Not a fake nonprofit, not a stolen reputation, but real change built on the solid ground of truth. I went back inside to feed Justice. He was waiting for me, tail wagging. We had a long walk ahead of us, and for the first time in my life, I was looking forward to every single step. The past was a prison cell, and I had left the key on the courtroom floor. I stand in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my bedroom. The morning light is unforgiving, but I do not hide from it. I lean in close, inspecting my reflection. My skin is glowing, nourished by good food, restful sleep, and the absence of stress. But there on my left cheekbone is a faint, thin white line. It is the scar from where the ring on my father's finger cut me when he punched me. For a long time I hated this scar. I tried to cover it with heavy makeup. I tried to angle my face in photos so it wouldn't show. I saw it as a mark of shame, a brand that labeled me as a battered daughter. But today, as I prepare to film the final video for my channel, I touch it with a sense of reverence. It is not a mark of shame. It is a battle scar. It is proof that I survived. It is the line where the old Jasmine died and the new Jasmine was born. I set up my ring light and my camera. I have millions of subscribers now. People tune in not just for the drama of my story, but for the advice I give on financial independence and emotional boundaries. I check the frame, I check the microphone, I press record. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I pause, looking directly into the lens, imagining the millions of women watching me. Women who are currently sitting in houses that feel like prisons. Women who are being told they are crazy or selfish or ungrateful. I want to show you something, I say, tilting my face to the light and pointing to the scar. Do you see this? My father gave this to me. He gave it to me on the night I finally said no. For a long time, I thought this scar meant I was broken. But I want you to know that breaking is sometimes the only way to escape. I lean back, clasping my hands in my lap. I have told you the story of how I lost my family, how I sent my father and brother to prison, how I exposed my sister-in-law, and I read your comments. Some of you call me a hero. Some of you call me cold. Some of you ask me how I could do it to my own blood. And this is the message I want to leave you with today. We are raised to believe that family is a suicide pact. We are taught that because someone shares your DNA, they have a license to abuse you, to use you, to disrespect you, and you have a duty to take it. We are taught that keeping the peace is more important than keeping your soul. I am here to tell you that is a lie. Family is not about blood. Blood is just biology. Family is about behavior. Family is about safety. Family is about mutual respect. If the people in your house are hurting you, stealing from you, or dimming your light, they are not your family. They are your captors. And you have every right to plan a jailbreak. I pick up my tablet and glance at my bank balance, not to brag, but to make a point. My freedom cost me everything I thought I knew. It was lonely at first. It was terrifying. But do you know what kept me safe? It wasn't thoughts and prayers. It was financial independence. They called me a bean counter. They laughed at my job. But my job was my weapon. If you are watching this and you feel trapped, I want you to listen to me. Get your money right. Hide it if you have to. Learn about credit. Learn about your rights. Financial literacy is the only thing that separates a victim from a survivor. You cannot walk away if you cannot pay for the bus ticket. So please stop waiting for them to change. They won't. My father is in a cell and he still blames me. My brother is broke and he still begs. They do not change. You have to change. Stand up. Speak the truth. And if they hit you, whether with their hands or their words, do not just take it. Document it, report it, and then burn their kingdom down. I smile, a genuine warm smile that reaches my eyes. You are stronger than you think. You are smarter than they say. And you are worth more than they will ever admit. I reach forward to the camera. Thank you for watching my story. Now go out there and write your own. And make sure you are the hero of it, not the victim. I press the stop button. The red light fades. The room is quiet. I stand up and walk to the balcony doors. I slide them open and step out. The sun is shining so brightly that it warms my face instantly. Below me, the city is waking up. Cars are honking, people are rushing to work, life is moving forward. And so am I. I turn my face to the sun, closing my eyes, feeling the heat on my scar. It doesn't hurt anymore. It hasn't hurt for a long time. I whistle for Justice. He comes bounding out onto the balcony, pressing his head against my leg. I bury my hands in his soft fur. We are okay, boy, I whisper. We are more than okay. I look out at the horizon where the sky meets the earth. The world is wide and open. The shadows of the Sterling mansion are far behind me, swallowed by the distance. I turn my back on the city, walk back into my home and close the door. The screen goes dark. But my life is just beginning. The story of Jasmine teaches us that loyalty should never come at the expense of your integrity or safety. We are often taught to endure abuse for the sake of family unity, but true family is built on respect, not manipulation. Her journey proves that financial literacy is the ultimate form of self-defense against control. By mastering her finances and standing firm in the truth, she transformed from a victim into a survivor. Sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from the people who share your blood to build the life you truly deserve. If Jasmine's victory inspired you to reclaim your power, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience. See